Hiring top talent isn't enough. They need a reason to stay. Scott, a 30-year HR veteran, joins me to share how early-stage founders can align pay and purpose. You'll walk away knowing how to retain key players with compensation strategies that scale with your mission. Welcome to Provider's Edge, the podcast that helps healthcare entrepreneurs and innovators break down barriers and control their business, life, and future with valuable action steps. With me, your host, Sabrina Runbeck, a recovered clinician and a business deal catalyst. Let's rewrite the rules and create a positive social impact while increasing your profitability. Before we dive into today's expert conversation, I want to pause for a minute and talk directly to the innovators in the room, especially if you're preparing for a raise or aim to land a pivotal partnership this year. Your pitch isn't just a story, it's a strategy. And if you're still guessing what investors or decision makers want to hear, you're already behind. That's exactly why we built Pitch to Yes. We don't just critique your pitch, we co-create it with you. You will walk away with a persuasion scorecard and a written pitch that turns attention into action. Apply at pitchtoyes.com. Now let's dive into today's conversation.
In any type of creation, especially in the startup world, company formation also means we have to make sure the people that are on this journey with us, they want to stay with us. They wanted to help us to build, to push against the ups and downs of being entrepreneurs. And how do you want to make sure the people you actually onboarded, whether they take equity or paying out as a staff or even the 1099s, are the right people? And when they do get on board as the right person, they actually want to stay with you. Today, we're talking to Scott about creating the best incentives for retaining these amazing top talents. And it's really critical in a small to mid-sized company. Now, larger companies, we can always say, hey, we have our big name out there. People are always applying to work for our organization. But smaller companies, when you cannot afford to lose someone, how do you do that? So thank you, Scott, for being here with us. I would love for you to tell a little bit about yourself. And now, why did you get into this specific niche of helping people to retain their talents? And out of anything that you can do in this HR world.
Well, thank you, Sabrina. It's wonderful to be on your show. And I really have been working in human resources, specifically in the area of compensation, for about 30 years. And the first 18 of those years were in the corporate world. But then really over 12 years ago, almost 13 years ago, I decided to strike out on my own and be an independent consultant. Compensation consultant. And one of the reasons that I wanted to go independent was specifically, how can I align employee compensation with employee engagement? This was really the focus of what I wanted to do. Because when you think about it, human resources is not a profit center. It's a support function. However, it can be very strategic in the area of employee engagement. Now, there are different areas of human resources, as you know. You mentioned recruitment, there's benefits, there's training, there's all these different areas that can promote employee engagement, because when employee engagement numbers go up, meaning you're not only retaining your workforce, but you're engaging your workforce, business results are better. And so that's the role that human resources can play. And so in my area of compensation, whether it was helping healthcare companies or all sorts of different industries, as well as startups or larger companies, it was this idea of what can I design from a market-based compensation perspective that in time can generate the kind of employee engagement levels that businesses need. So that's how I got into it.
Yeah, it's definitely important to see there are different components of talent. And for some people, talent is seen as an expense. And for others, are seen as a critical role to actually sell, right? To create revenue. Because at the end of the day, if you have the wrong people doing the wrong things, that's what's costly. When you have the right people in the right roles and they enjoy, right? We talk about resiliency in companies. It's actually everybody already coming with this lightness, this fun, this thing that they just already self motivate. And when you have these elements, like what you're saying, how do we make sure they are compensated in the right way so they
Right.
feel appreciated? And appreciation has been studied as the number one factor in why people would remain in an employment, right? And so we have to start thinking about there are different ways to compensate for people, and there just like I always refer to, there are different apology languages and love languages. There's also appreciation languages. So we needed to have that comprehensive plan and understand sometimes that in these smaller startups, uh, they wanted to say, oh, let me just give you some equity. And versus, do we really want to lose equity? Do you not want to stay lean? And you have to think about what other ways can there be to keep these top talent or recruit these people as your advisors so they can actually want to do things and open door for you. So that's something I was curious about your experience as well with when you start thinking about these newer early stage companies versus growth stage company. How do they come up with the best plan when you have these very high function people that they want to recruit?
Well, when you look at startup organizations or small companies, remember, this is a very intimate environment. So, first of all, that's going to be very different for the employees. It's going to be a small group of employees working together. And beyond that, it's very important to understand that you need to have a certain level of transparency with these employees because these are the builders of your company, and they're going to be wearing a lot of different hats. If you're in a larger corporation, you might get segmented into a particular role that's very easy to market price in terms of the value. But when you're in a startup, and I worked for 3.5 years in a startup, and I can tell you from personal experience, you wear a lot of different hats. And so you need to have a pay structure and a career development pathway or an architecture that can grow with the company as the company grows. So again, very different. In a large company, you're going to have maybe a very traditional job focused type of pay structure, whereas in a startup environment, it's going to be definitely more flexible. And you need to build in to that structure the ideas that you're going to grow. So this structure, this pay structure, how you pay employees and how you grow employees, most importantly, from a career development perspective, it needs to be one that is robust enough that grows with you as the company moves along. And you mentioned about equity. So for example, in a startup environment, you may not want to pay as much in base pay that the market indicates. You may want to pay more than the market indicates in the area of variable pay, because think about it. In startups, you're often got private funding, investors in the company, and you need to hit certain milestones as you go along. Well, you may very well want to have a variable pay plan that's very lucrative for employees for hitting those milestones because you're in survival mode. And if you can engage employees towards specific objectives for that company to meet, and that's what I help with, is helping to understand, okay, initially, what's the business mission and what's the company pay philosophy just initially now and what it might look like a few years from now. So it's really those different elements. So the size of the company and where you're at in your development makes a big difference.
Exactly. Now, early stage company, I think sometimes they misunderstand to say, I see the big potential. I'm willing to give a percentage to this person, that person, if you stay in the long haul. Now, we are also very careful, especially people that we work with, to say, are they the right people for you? Just because the initial alignment is there, you still have to actually properly assess them. And if there truly are those people, do you know what they actually want out of this career that matches, Scott, what you're mentioning on, okay, so we have to think about, like, is that paying perhaps a slightly lower monthly payout because you're giving them higher equity, or you're willing to fundraise for your employees because, or your advisors or executives, because they're able to deliver a subset of result, then you can actually prove to your investor this is worth it, right? So there is also a financial projection perspective as well as that match investor perspective, because I've seen too many people pitch their company for raising funds, and often is, oh, I needed this amount for my product development. We needed this amount for marketing with these amount for salary. And we're like, whoa, okay, hold on. Like, why do they even deserve that? Right? Like, what does that make sense?
When we think about building a company, we often start straight to funding and product. But the truth is, none of that matters if you don't have the right people besides you. In my conversation with Scott, we explored how small to mid-sized healthcare startups cannot afford to lose their top talent, and why aligning compensation with engagement is the key to keeping them. Scott reminded us that in a startup, your team wears multiple hats, and their growth path has to expand as fast as your company does. This isn't about just hanging out equity. It's about designing smart, flexible structures that make people feel valued, motivated, and invested in the mission.
Real quick, if you're a healthcare founder building in women's health, mental health, digital health, age tech, biotech, diagnostics, or longevity, we built Capital Engine for you. We don't just get you in the room, we make sure you're ready to own it. Our team vets the right investors and potential C-suite operators to help you validate products, run pilot trials, or scale your next revenue partner. Some founders get so much investor interest, they've asked us to slow it down. And whether it takes 2 months or 2 years, we stay with you until your raise is closed with expert advisors who've built and exited healthcare companies themselves. Apply now at Capital Engine VC and let's get to work. All right, let's get back to the second half of our show.
So I feel like sometimes the people don't really understand. They're just like, well, if there's money needed to pay people so they can work, true, right? There's a foundation of value to make them feel like they are still being seen. And at the end of the day, everyone got bills, right? So in that sense, how do you help people to work through some of the early stage where they feel like, well, we're only making so much revenue. And then how do we really keep some of the people that stay in and doesn't feel like our progress is too slow, or we have to wait for another 6 months before the next big contract comes in?
Yeah. You have to go back to when you bring in individuals into the organization, you have to ask yourself, okay, what is the business need? And based on the potential of these employees that we're bringing into the organization, yes, like you stated, we're bringing them in. We've got a set amount of money here at the moment to bring them in as a product manager, okay? But the business need is going to continue to evolve as they grow. So what is the potential of each of these individuals? Again, when you're first starting to build a company, you're looking at some very key individuals. And I think it's very important that you understand that you need to be transparent with those employees up front and say, look, your career development needs are going to be linked to the business need. And where do you want to go in the next few years? And get a sense when that person responds and they talk about that. How does that fit in with the business need? To me, that's the most important thing. So it's a very transparent, open dialogue that you may not get in a larger company where you're being brought in for a very specific role. Not that there isn't career development in a large company, there certainly is. But again, getting back to the startup environment, we can say, we're bringing you in at an intermediate level professional. But here's the kind of skill sets that you're going to need or that you may already have. We don't have need for them right now, but the business need. So if you're wondering, this is where you're going to move next. Are you going to move up as an individual contributor to a higher career level of that role? Or are we going to need you in a people leadership role? And where do your interests lie? So the key of all this, the bottom line of all this is that business career development, in a sense, especially in a startup, needs to be linked to the business need of today and then going forward into the future. So you have to project out a bit, and you need to have that intimacy and that transparency with employees. So again, if I was assisting an organization from the very beginning, I would ask them these kind of questions from the outside. What is your initial pay philosophy? What do you think it's going to be a few years? What is your business need? Are you going to be more operationally focused or more customer focused? These are all decisions and things that I need to listen to and hear so that I can build compensation programs that will attract, retain, and engage employees. So that's really how I come at it. It's linking career development to the business need.
That's very smart in any developmental like project creation. Is what do you need for the business in the phase you're in? And
Yeah.
I think, Scott, you were mentioning that, well, if the company right now, this quarter or this next couple quarter is about operational, getting that foundation, solid work together, then we need to bring in those people who have those talent, and what they want might be a little bit different, right? They can be very systematic people. They're implementers, right? They're planners. And those planners are going to have a different drive of how they see their career versus if people are bringing in a entire new sales force, then they're more likely to take a commission base because you have the high volume there. But if you are trying to start selling more, but your marketing department wouldn't be able to quite catch bringing them on the leads, then of course the person that you're hiring, despite how high the percentage of commission, they might not still stay, right? So we have to listen to what the business need and then to create other incentive based on the volume of what we're doing in the business strategy part. So at the end of the day, it's about talking to a lot of different people to see what's the whole picture of the company.
Yes, unfortunately, sometimes employees, their future needs may or may not dovetail with what the business need is. However, again, you might have an individual that you might have a really flat organization, which some individuals aspire to be people leaders, but some do not. But they still want to grow. They want to grow as a project leader, maybe managing budgets, managing overall projects. So again, if that's their interest, we need to look at the business need, and is that going to be available? Open, honest dialogue and listening is so important in what we do in human resources, whether it's recruiting or what I do in compensation. Listening to the client and gaining as much information before we even get out a pen and paper and start to scratch out what a structure will look like. But fundamentally, how I then approach it is from a market-based perspective, because market-based is something that is the most objective. It's the most understandable to employees. And again, employees need to understand the logic of how they're getting paid. And the more transparent we can be, the better off in the area of engagement. They need to understand, they may not completely agree, but they need to understand what the logic behind pay decisions are both now and in the future.
Exactly. And I also wanted to reverse psychology a little bit more. Now we're thinking about a lot of us are these high level executives, right? We work at many different companies. What I hear repeatedly for the past year, especially, is that people go through so many interviews or they go through the same company, multiple different rounds and different meetings, and still couldn't quite lock down. And then it seems like the company side is they don't actually understand who they need.
Mm-hmm.
And while they're having these conversations with multiple candidates, people feel like they got stringed along, right? And then they don't feel being valued. And then at the last call, they're saying, you're one of our top person that we really want, but then weeks later they felt ghosted, where they felt like this is not exactly what it is, and then it's a no. So it's definitely very frustrating for the executive trying to help these growth phase companies. At the same time, I believe it's definitely frustrating also for these growth phase companies trying to get the right executive to be in their company as leaders, isn't it? What's the dynamic that you can help us to understand there?
Well, absolutely. I think you've hit it right on the head. I think in some ways you've answered your own question, Sabrina, in the sense that they're struggling to find the right candidate. They might have 3 or 4 that meet all of the qualifications, and they're so focused on the qualifications of the candidate. But it should be easier and faster. Okay, you've got these different candidates. They have all the same skills. They have the same experiences. So it's hard to distinguish between them. But if you see who's the best fit for the business need, not just today, but a few years down the road. So we need forward thinking. We need people that are interviewing these candidates and making the decisions who truly understand the business need. And that is just so fundamental. And it goes for the recruitment side as well as the compensation side. So that's the best way I can address. I think that's the differentiator, is who out of those 3 or 4 people that you've got to narrow down to has the best long-term future based on the business need of what it's going to be today as well as tomorrow.
Yeah, I think that's very key, right? It's whoever is the initial person who thought about even this role. What is that future need for this person besides the immediate need? And at the same time, how is this person, this candidate, in a marriage and fit into the existing culture? And do they even know their existing culture?
It's one thing to bring someone onto your team, but it's another to keep them motivated when contracts are slow or revenue hasn't caught up to your vision yet. Scott explained that this is where transparency becomes non-negotiable. Employees need to understand not just what their roles is today, but how their career paths grow as their business grows. By linking compensation and development directly to evolving business needs, founders can keep talent engaged even during leaner phases. And it's not always about paying the most. It's about giving people clarity, logic, and a future they can see themselves in. Now, before we go to the next section, I want to hear from you. Tell us by posting on LinkedIn and tag myself, Sabrina, Runbeck, or Scott for your next key hire. What does, quote, future fit looks like for the next 12 months? And how would you test it during an interview?
A lot of time what I'm hearing is, oh, Sabrina, I got this person who we know, and it's by recommendation. I think they will fit. I'm like, whoa, wait a second. We haven't assessed them yet. How do you know they can just jump in and running, right?
Yeah.
And then, if it's not the right fit, doesn't matter how much compensation you give to them, they still might not stay or might damage the relationship you have internally. And then you have to replace them. That's just way too costly, right?
Yeah.
So it's definitely that fine line of, I think everyone who start writing that job role, And sometimes you don't even know a set job role. You have to start brainstorming with the people who are good at future vision and mission development, and then bring it to these HRs who become very specific to say, okay, now that I know what that is, now I can look for someone, and creating the interviews, the processes that can actually help us to get there.
Yeah. And the other thing too is all of what we've talked about is important. And again, having the right people who understand the business need and the strategy going forward and can convey that in interviews and draw out of the candidates who's going to be the best fit, but they need the tools. And it's not fair to just sit back and leave that all on the manager. We need to have, and that's again when the idea of, if I lay out a career architecture program at different levels, then they can translate the business need into that career architecture program. Okay, right now you're going to be a project leader at the senior level, but 2 years from now, we're going to need you to be a higher level project leader, still an individual contributor. And this is what we're going to do in the first couple of years in terms of growing your skill set so you can be ready for that. I mean, that's the big thing also with employees. It's not just about pay, it's linking career development to pay. They're both important. And I think with the employees themselves, we want to emphasize more the career development aspects, because that is what leads to larger pay growth automatically. Okay. So I don't need to think that you have to get all that transparent with employees about what their pay might be in a few years, because the business is continually evolving. But you need to give them a good sense of the idea that we have a career development program, give them an example, and then show them how that grows their pay over time and keeps them interested. There are a lot of other tools that you can use. You can use retention bonuses and things of that nature, but that only guarantees retention for a certain period of time. It does not guarantee employee engagement. And that's where the career development piece linked to giving them visibility to competitive and beyond competitive market pay levels. And how do you mix in variable pay? That's the kind of transparency linked to career development that's going to lead to engagement. And retention is fine, but engagement is even more important. And that's where HR can be a strategic partner, because that is something we can influence. And it's been proven. If we can if we can move the needle on employee engagement, the best compliment I ever got in my life as a consultant was when months after a project, or over a year after a project was put in, having the CEO tell me that the needle was moved on employee engagement. Now, I'm not taking credit for that all myself, but to hear that was like getting a trophy or an extra $10,000 or anything, because that's what we should be trying to do in human resources, because that's our strategic piece that we fit into, is increasing employee, giving the tools that help support management as the most important person in the employee's life. It's not human resources, but management needs the tools. And so that's where we come in.
Exactly. I think it's definitely having that career ladder for people to see a future in how they embody, how they're growing is very important for them. I think the biggest challenge is when we start bringing on executive board members, they're already somewhat on the top of their career for that company. And how do we grow them while this company is expanding? That's most likely to be the challenge for some of these people to be onboarded. And then still also from a owner perspective, if we hire these people, we give them equity or we give them a base pay, how do we feel like they're actually actively contributing instead of just a board member, which a lot of people are multiple boards, right? Yeah. And then how do we want to make sure they're not diverting their attention everywhere else? They're actively engaged in these smaller areas. So I think those probably one of those bigger challenges in those smaller growth companies.
Well, yeah, at a certain point, when you're talking about high level executives, at a certain point, career development opportunities and pay growth opportunities are going to get more diminished. But again, at these levels, they should be thinking quite strategically. And then you can get into ideas like long term incentives, where we're going to reward them by giving them separate from short term incentives, but long term incentives, where they're going to be able to move the needle in their own way and focus on business objectives that they can truly influence. And so that's the way that I look at it, because there comes a certain point where pay growth and career development is going to tap out at the very top levels. But if they're not at the top levels, let's say they're at the standard first level vice president, then you got to have succession planning in place to make sure that these individuals can see at least a future beyond there. But again, in those situations that you talk about, I see longer term incentives as being an opportunity where you actually, again, these are not the standard business measurements, but the measurements that are important to the company that your job can directly influence. So it's not all the executives have the same measurements and metrics. And I think that can be engaging to that level of executive.
Perfect. Yes. It's all about customization of who you
Yes.
talk to in what role that will fit into the need. And we all know every single person, even just because you are a VP of something, it doesn't mean you have the equal amount of contribution resources. So we do need to start considering how much of pie this person needed to build, right? Like help you cook this part of pie versus other people have a small slice, and it's because it's proportional to what they are able to do. So I know this is like a big topic and then we can talk forever on it. And now Sky is someone who's been in a business for so long, very knowledgeable, easy to talk to. For all of you guys who are having this debate of I'm onboarding people, how do I make sure these amazing people that we're onboarding, where I'm start thinking onboarding, have the good compensation plan that matches my business growth as well as theirs, then reach out to Scott. What's the best way for people to reach out to you?
LinkedIn is a really good source. I have a LinkedIn profile page, and that has my contact information on it. Also, I'm a member of the Better Business Bureau of Southeast Florida and the Caribbean. And the reason why I mention that is because out there, there's a lot of testimonials from my clients where they talk about the kind of things that we talked about on this program. So again, if you need to link market-based pay to career development pathways for your employees, that's definitely an area, as well as other areas in compensation that I could help with. But LinkedIn is a good source to reach out to me. And as I mentioned, the Better Business Bureau profile.
Amazing. So for people to perhaps you're in the stage to onboarding someone who's a higher level executive, or you need to start building your own internal team and not just outsourcing, then reach out to Scott on LinkedIn. Until next time. And for everybody else, I would love to hear what you guys have learned about today's episode. What's something that light up in your brain? Take a screenshot and post on LinkedIn, and we can't wait to continue the conversation with you. Bye-bye.
As we wrap up today's episode with Scott, a compensation consultant with decades of experience helping organizations design strategies that keep people engaged and aligned. Let us summarize exactly what we talked about. We didn't stop at compensation. We dove deeper into how credibility we have to obtain as a founder, and to show why healthcare decision makers don't just buy solution, they buy trust. And that trust is what gave the true leader influence over the right talent they need to have in their team. Here are the 6 key learning points. Number 1, retention starts with role clarity and transparency. In startup, people wear many hats. Set expectations early. How today's role evolves, what skills will be built, and how that ties to the company's next 12 to 24 months. Number 2, design pay for your stage. Blend base and variables. Each early stage team may run lean on base pay, but can use milestone-tied variable pay to keep people engaged and aligned with survival metrics and investor milestones. Number 3, link compensation to career development. Paying alone keeps people briefly career paths, such as internal growth, leadership track, project ownership, sustain engagement, and reduce flight risk. Number 4, equity isn't a fix-all. Don't default to give away equity. Consider retention bonuses, outcome-based incentives, and advisory structure, especially when you need doors open but must protect cap table. Number 5, hire for future fit, not just present skills. When candidates look similar on paper, the differentiator is fit for tomorrow's business needs and culture, not just today's checklist. Number 6, executive needs long-term incentives. At senior level, career ladder flatten. Use long-term incentives tied to objectives each exec can direct influence. Avoid one-size-fits-all metric. Now, we would love for you to ponder and think about which milestone in the next 2 quarters could you tie to a variable pay plan to keep your best people engaged right now. Thank you for tuning in to Provider's Edge podcast. We hope you enjoy our latest episode and found the insights and tips helpful. We'd love to hear your feedback on the show and learn what topics you'd like us to cover in the future. So please take a moment to leave us a review on your favorite podcast platform and let us know what you think. Your feedback is essential to help us improve the show and provide you with the content you need to take your healthcare business to the next level. Thank you for your support, and we look forward to hearing from you soon.